Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Arunachala Ramanaya. Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about verses 969 and 970 of Guru Vācaka Kōvai. In the last two meetings, I talked about the first four verses in the chapter on divine grace, and these are the last two verses in that chapter. So there are six in all. And what Bhagavan says in verse 969 is, I'll first read the exact translation and then a paraphrase, and then I'll go through Murugan's and Sadhu Om's paraphrases. So the exact meaning of the verse is, Jivas who stand immersed in the flood of the ambrosia of grace, being distressed and bewildered, is the foolishness of someone suffering, not knowing how to quench the thirst, standing in the midst of the flood of water of the overflowing Ganga river. If we slightly expand it, jivas means sentient beings or souls who stand immersed in the flood of the ambrosia of grace. That implies that flood of the ambrosia of grace is eternal and omnipresent. It's always here. Why it's always here? Because as Bhagavan explained in verse 966, it is shining within us as our very being, I am. So grace is never something that is absent. That is, it's always shining in our heart as our own being, and consequently we are ever immersed in it. But we fail to recognize it, obviously. So what he says here is, jivas who always stand immersed in the flood of the ambrosia of grace, being distressed and bewildered, not knowing how to imbibe that grace, by means of which alone they can escape the immense suffering of samsara, the cruel cycle of birth and death, that's what's implied, is just like the foolishness of someone suffering, that the word for suffering can also mean dying, not knowing how to quench their thirst, even though they're standing in the midst of the flood of water of the overflowing Ganga river. So this is a very nice analogy Bhagavan uses here, that grace is ever present, like the flooding water of the overflowing Ganga river, and we are standing in the midst of it, but because of not recognizing that, we are distressed, thinking that we are caught up in this samsara, and we don't know how to escape from this suffering. Where all we have to do, just like a person standing in the midst of a flood, if they're feeling thirsty, all they need to do is to bend down and drink the water, and their thirst will be quenched. Likewise, all we have to do to imbibe this grace is to surrender. That is to subside back into the heart and thereby imbibe the ever-present grace. Subside means we have to cease rising as ego. I mentioned in connection with some of the other verses, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa gave a very nice analogy. He said, grace is always pouring down torrentially like the monsoon rain. But though it falls equally on all, it runs, just like the monsoon rain will run off a mound and accumulate only in the low-lying places. Likewise, if we rise as ego, the grace flows off us, so to speak. Whereas if we subside, the grace will accumulate in our heart. So if we want to be fully benefited by the ever-present grace, the ever-present flood of grace or shower of grace, however you want to describe it, all we have to do is to subside, and grace will do everything that is required. It is our rising as ego that is what is obstructing grace. Grace is ever there, ever available to save us from this samsara, this ocean of birth and death. Grace is always ready to save us, but in order to be saved by it, we need to be willing to surrender, to subside back into the heart. And we can subside back into the heart by turning our attention inwards, and because that self-attentiveness is what brings about the subsidence of ego in such a way that it never rises again. Muruganu's paraphrase of this verse means people who stand immersed uninterruptedly in the flood of ambrosia, which is God's grace, being distressed and suffering because of mental thirst caused only by subjugation to the delusion that has possessed them, is just like those who stand living in the middle of the flood of water of the Ganga River, which is forcefully dashing against the banks, suffering as if dead because of their stupidity of being those who do not know how to quench the thirst that torments them. So our thirst we all suffering from thirst for happiness. That is a thirst that is referred to here. We all craving happiness, and we're seeking happiness in this or in that. But our thirst for happiness is never satisfied by any amount of vishayas, any amount of phenomena, any amount of whatever we may experience, whether we experience whatever we see, however we seek happiness in things outside ourselves, we'll always be disappointed because the happiness we're seeking is ever in our heart. So all we need to do is to subside, and that grace in the form of the infinite ocean of happiness will swallow us. But we need to be willing to subside. Sorry, that's my comment on what Muruganu's paraphrase. And Murugan also gives a brief explanation for this. What he says is, since grace itself is the very nature or swarupa of God, it is what is spread everywhere. Standing immersed within it, without ever leaving it, blessed souls suffering because of the pain of birth. The pain of birth implies the pain of samsara, the misery caused by the perpetual cycle of birth and death. It's not the pain of actually the process of being born. The pain of birth means the pain of samsara, the pain of this perpetual cycle of birth and death. So blessed souls suffering because of the pain of birth is not anything other than foolishness, or the word he uses for foolishness can also mean ignorance. So foolishness or ignorance, it amounts to the same in this context. And Sadhu Om's paraphrase, he starts by referring back to verse 966. I'll just read the meaning of 966 again, just to refresh our memory if we've forgotten. What Bhagavan says is that he says, Ulludu alone is grace. Ulludu means what is, or what actually is. So the one existing reality, that alone is divine grace. And it's ever flourishing in our heart, and it's ever flourishing as Ulam. Ulam has two meanings. It means the heart, and it also means we are. When he says we are, that's an inclusive form of our awareness of being, I am. So it's ever shining as I am within our heart. So when such is the case, blame for the fault of neglecting that Ulludu, that one thing that actually exists, which is our own real nature, the blame for neglecting that pertains only to souls who do not think of it melting within due to intense love. Instead, how instead can the blame for the fault of not bestowing sweet grace upon those souls pertain to that Ulludu? That Ulludu means that ultimate reality, Brahman or whatever we call it, since that is ever present, since that itself is grace, and it's our own very being. It's not something separate from ourselves. We can never say that the grace is not bestowed upon us. The grace is always there. It's always shining in our heart as our own being, I am. So if we feel grace is lacking, it's because we are neglecting it, not because it is neglecting us. That is the idea in 966. So this is what Sadhu Om refers to in his paraphrase, in his Tamil paraphrase, that is, the meaning of which I'm going to read now. Since God is continuously bestowing divine grace equally upon everyone, always and everywhere, as said in verse 966, all jivas who are naturally standing immersed in the ambrosia of God's grace, which is swelling as a flood, those jivas being bewildered under the sway of delusion is just like the stupidity of someone who is standing in the middle of a flood of water of the Ganga river, which is rising and swelling, being distressed and suffering greatly with thirst, not knowing how to relieve their thirst for cool water, implying by drinking it, where all we need to do is to bend down and drink it. And then Sadhu Om gave an explanation in English. Someone who is standing neck deep in the flooding water of the Ganga need only bend down to drink and quench their thirst. Likewise, since God or Guru is always bestowing his grace upon us by shining within us as I am, to imbibe and quench our thirst for it, we need only turn our attention back within towards I am. So what Bhagavan is reminding us here, grace is never lacking. It's always present. It's our own very being. So we're always immersed in it. But in order to imbibe it fully, in order to have our thirst for, our craving for happiness quenched, all we need to do is to turn our attention back within, where grace is ever shining as our own being. Then the last verse in this chapter, 970, I'll read I'll read the, the exact meaning of the verse, and then I'll give an explanatory paraphrase. What is said in the verse is, it starts with a question. Whysoever is the impartial God who looks benevolently upon everyone, disregarding those who are wicked? And the answer given is, the eye that shines as everything will not disregard anything. The delusion of their dim, defective sight. And that's all that's there. The last sentence is just the delusion of their dim, defective sight. So we have to understand the connection between these. That is often in verses, the teachings are given in an aphoristic manner. So we have to make the connections. So my explanatory paraphrase for this is, for whatever reason does the impartial God, who looks benevolently or graciously upon everyone, disregard, neglect, discard, or disdain, or spurn those who are wicked? If anyone asks thus, the answer is the I means the EYE, it's Tamil word kan, but it's often used in a metaphorical sense. The I, namely God, the one infinite awareness, that is the word kan in Tamil, which means eye, the organ of sight, is often used as a metaphor for awareness. So, and in this case, it's referring to the real awareness, the one infinite awareness that is called God. So, the I that shines or flourishes as everything will not ever disregard, neglect, discard, disdain, spurn anything or anyone. And then the final sentence, which is just the delusion of their dim defective sight, what that implies is those who imagine that he does so, those who imagine that he does, do so only because of the delusion of their dim defective sight. That is, if we think God is disregarding or spurning some people, even the most wicked people, it's because of our defective outlook. Because we fail to see with clarity, but he is equally gracious to all. He's showering his grace equally on the good and the bad alike. Murugan has written quite a long explanation, quite a long paraphrase for this, and then he's written an explanation. So I'll read his paraphrase first. If it is asked, why soever God, who is said by sages to be looking benevolently or graciously, not just upon those who are good, but impartially upon everyone, but why he is disregarding, neglecting, discarding, or disdaining only those who are wicked, the answer is that when he himself, disregarding anything whatsoever, is in the first place not possible, since he himself is the very I, namely the one infinite awareness, that exists and shines as everything that is seen, or perceived, or known. Their thinking contrary to the truth that he himself does so, namely that he does disregard some, that is mental delusion, which is the dim defective sight of those who think thus, being unable to understand or know the truth. And then Murugan gives an explanation for this. When God, pervading within every soul or sentient being as Atma-swarupa, the real nature of themselves, of each one of us, is always unceasingly knowing them all as Tanmayam. Tanmaya is a Sanskrit compound. It's the compound of tat, which means that, which refers to Brahman or God himself. And maya means what is composed of or what consists of. So he knows them all as consisting only of himself. In other words, he doesn't see them as anything other than himself. Since he himself is knowing them, thus, thereby eternally bestowing grace upon them, that's the implication, since he himself, knowing them thus, cannot be known by them unless they themselves know him. He, Bhagavan, says, and then he quotes the final sentence, which is just the delusion of their dim defective sight. That is, if we don't know God, we cannot know that he is ever knowing us. He always knows us. He's always been gracious to us. But it's because of our ignorance of his nature, of his real nature, which is grace itself, we think that he's not bestowing his grace upon us or upon certain people. Grace is his very nature, so he can never not bestow grace on anyone. That is the idea. And Sadhu Om's paraphrase is similar. Actually, here, I think this is, yeah, if I remember correctly, there's yes, I think this, no, this isn't, there was one other verse that I translated recently where Sadhu Om's paraphrase is actually a paraphrase of Murugan's paraphrase. Murugan's paraphrase is expressed in a very difficult way. Murugan expresses things very beautifully, but it's not always easy to understand what he's saying. Whereas Sadhu Om often will paraphrase Murugan's paraphrase to make it more clear what Murugan is saying, make it easier for people to understand, that is. Not that there's any wrong in the way Murugan says it, but it's just people often have difficulty understanding Murugan's language because he puts things in He expresses them in a very deep way. So Sadhu Om's paraphrase is, if it is asked, why does God, who is the impartial one, who comes giving the benevolent look of his divine grace to all jivas, as sages declared, saying, O center, eternal, O center. Center here means eternally immanent and indwelling Lord, who stands impartial both to the good and the wicked. That's a quotation from a verse of Ramalinga Swami. So why does God, who is impartial, who is the impartial one, who gives the benevolent look of his grace to all jivas, why does he reject only those who are wicked, not bestowing grace upon them? So if it's asked in such a way, the answer is that there is no such thing as God, who is himself the very I, namely the one infinite awareness, that shines indivisibly, pervading everywhere, in all things that are seen, disregarding anything whatsoever. So in other words, there's just not, there's no such thing as God disregarding anything. In other words, he's always equal, bestowing his grace equally upon all. The reason for God seeming to others to be thus disregarding, neglecting, discarding, or disdaining is just mental delusion, which is their dim, defective sight. So that's his paraphrase. I mean, the explanation Sadhu Om gives for this. Well, this explanation consists partly of the explanation he gave to me in English and partly of the explanation that he wrote in Tamil. So the first part is what he explained in English, which is kan means I, which is sometimes used as a metonym for awareness, jnana, since in the either in the sense of transitive object knowing awareness or intransitive pure object non-object knowing awareness. Therefore, the phrase Elamai Pongum Kan, the I that shines or flourishes as everything, refers to God as the one infinite awareness I am, which is what shines as everything. Since this awareness I am is shining in everyone as the true form or swarupa of grace, it can never be said that the eye of grace is rejecting anyone. So this is what he explained to me in English. And the translation of his Tamil note is, if we are to say that someone did not see us, we can do so only after looking carefully at them. That is, if we're not looking at someone, we can't say they're not looking at us. We have to be looking at them in order to know that they're not looking at us. Likewise, if we are to complain that God has not been gracious to us, we can do so only after we have seen with the inner eye, having turned and looked at the self-awareness I am, which is the beauty as which he shines. That is, he's always shining at that. He's always beautifully shining at that self-awareness I am in our heart. But if we don't look at that, look at him within our heart, where he's always shining as I am, how can we say that he's not looking at us? That is, we're not justified in saying that he's not being gracious to us unless we are gracious to him by looking at him where he's ever shining in our heart. That's the implication. I mean, to continue what Sadhu Om actually wrote, without thus facing towards ourself, Atman, when continuously facing outwards, saying God has not looked at me benevolently or graciously is both inappropriate and unjustified. Consider the conclusion of verse 44 of Sri Sadhu turning within, see yourself daily or constantly with the inner eye. It will be known. But Sadhu Om, that's what Bhagavan says in Tamil. Turning within, see yourself daily or constantly with the inner eye, it will be known. This is what Bhagavan says in verse 44 of Aksharamlai. This is what Arunacha taught him. Sadhu Om takes this it in this context to mean his bestowing grace. That is, he's always there in our heart. We can know him only by turning within and seeing ourselves daily with the inner eye. The inner eye means the eye of attention. And no, the inward-looking attention, the eye of the inward-looking attention. If we do so, as Bhagavan says, terium means it will be known. But that it is obviously referring to, well, in the previous verse, Bhagavan had said, Tane tane tattvam. Idane tane kartvaya ranachala. Tane tane tattvam means oneself alone is the reality. Actually, oneself alone is repeated there for emphasis. That alone is tattvam. That alone is what is real. That's alone the reality. Tane kartvaya ranachala. You yourself you yourself show this to me. So in the context, it means the fact that that we are self of a reality, and we are self of because we are self of reality. That implies he's always bestowing his grace upon us, because Arunachala is always shining within us as our own being. So that is his grace. So we will know that only if we turn within and see ourselves daily with the inner eye. That's what Sadhu Om implies here by referring to that verse of Aksharamlai. And then he concludes by saying, therefore the extroverted look or perspective of those who have not seen with the inner eye, namely inward-facing attention, is what is referred to in this verse as the delusion of their dim, defective outlook. And then I added a short, I just added a small note here, but because Sadhu Om quotes a line from a verse of Ramalinga Swami in his Pariparai. Those who are well versed in Tamil literature will recognize that, but for those who don't recognize it, I added a small note saying where giving the reference for that line. Nalakum palakum nadu nindra naduve. That is, there Ramalinga Swami addresses Shiva, God, as Naduve, the center. The center who stands impartial both to the good and the wicked. So that's very, very appropriate in the context of this verse, but where Bhagavan is asserting that God is always impartial to all, and he bestows his grace equally upon all. And if we fail to see that, that is the delusion of our dim, defective sight. And that delusion is because of our always looking outwards instead of looking inwards, where he's ever shining as our own being. I hope that I hope my explanation of those two verses is clear. If anyone has any questions about this or anything related to this.
Yeah, there are some questions, Michael, related to the verses.
Okay.
The first is, in both these verses, verse 20 of Upadesh Undiyar and verse 30 of Uludu Narpadu, Bhagavan says that where the ego merges or subsides, something else shines as I am, I. Does it mean that there's actually an ego that merges or subsides into its source, the pure being awareness? Or is it a discovery that there's no such thing as an ego that ever arises, that merges or subsides into its source?
Yes. Well, yes. Bhagavan says very clearly in verse 17 of Upadesh Undiyar that if we investigate the nature of the mind without forgetting, in other words, if we vigilantly attend to ourselves without allowing our attention to slip away towards anything else, manomenam ondrile, he says, there's no such thing as mind at all. In other words, what we will find if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, that there's no such thing as mind at all. That is what we now take as mind or ego is this adjunct conflated awareness, I am this person. That is, as ego or mind, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this person. But we're aware of ourselves as I am this person only when we're attending to things other than ourselves. If we turn our attention back to ourselves to see what we actually are, then it's clear there's no such thing as mind at all. So that's what he refers to in verse 19 of Upadesha, because 19 and 20 we have to read together. Wait a second, I'll just get the exact meaning of the verse. And verse 30 of Uludunapadu, which you also referred to, that is actually a combination of the ideas in verses 19 and 20 of Upadesha. So in verse 19 of Upadesha, he says, when one investigates within, what is the place from which one rises as I? The place here doesn't mean a literal place in terms of space. It's a metaphor. Bhagavan often uses the word idam, which means place, in a metaphorical sense. So if one investigates what the place is from which one rises I, that means what is the source? From what does this I rise? Obviously, the rising I rises only from a being I. In other words, ego rises from our own being. So when we investigate our own being, I will die. What he describes here as Nantale Saindidam, literally actually Nantale Saindidam, means I will become headbent, but that's a metaphorical way of saying it will die. So when he says, I will die. 2 verses earlier in verse 17, he said it'll be clear there's no such thing as mind at all. They amount to the same thing. That is, when we see what we actually are, we will see this. We will see that there's no such thing as ego. This is like if we say, if you look very carefully at the snake, you'll see it's a rope. Seeing it as a rope means you're seeing that there never was a snake there in the first place. And that, metaphorically, we can say that is killing the snake. That is, the snake will die. In other words, the appearance of the snake will cease to exist. And he then says, Idu jnana vicharam. This is awareness investigation. And then in verse 20, he says, where this I, in the place where I merges, in other words, in our own being, that, for one, appears spontaneously as I am I. That here refers to, he says that, for one, onju adu. So that's referring to a one reality that appears spontaneously as I am I. That is, so long as we're looking outwards, we wrongly experience ourselves as I am this body, I am this person, I am so and so. But when we know ourselves as we actually are, we'll know what we actually are is only ourselves. We're not anything other than ourselves. So who am I? I am I, nothing but I, is the implication. So what appears spontaneously as I am I, he then says that itself is the whole. Tanadu Pundramam. So Tanadu means that itself. Pundram is a Tamil equivalent of the Sanskrit word Purna. In fact, in the Sanskrit version, Bhagavan says Parama Purna Sat. That is what appears as I am I. That is the Parama means the supreme, ultimate, Purna, full being. So it's the very fullness of being that appears as I am I. Now I've explained all that, but I've forgotten exactly what the question was.
So the question is, in both these verses, verse 20 of Upadesha Undiyar and verse 30 of Ulludu Narpadu, Bhagavan says that where the ego merges or subsides, something else shines as I am I. This ego, does it mean that there's actually an ego that merges or subsides into its source, the pure being awareness? Or is it a discovery that there's no such thing as an ego that ever arises, that merges or subsides into its source?
Yes, what is called the merging or subsidence of ego into its source is the recognition that there's no such thing as ego at all. In order to recognize that, we need to know what we actually are. Because ego is what ego, as Bhagavan often said, ego is that which is aware of itself as I am this body. Therefore, it's a false awareness because what we actually are is not this body. So in order to get rid of this false awareness, we need only the real awareness will get rid of the false awareness. In other words, now we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. In order to remove this, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. In order to kill the illusory snake, we need to see what it actually is. As soon as we see that it's just a rope, then we know it was never a snake. So what is metaphorically called the dying of I is nothing but the recognition of what we actually are. When we are aware of ourselves as we actually are, it's clear we were never anything other than that. So ego is found to be ever non-existent. Just like if you look at the snake carefully, you will find it's just a rope and therefore was never a snake. The snake was an ever non-existent snake. It was just a mere appearance. Likewise, we seem to be that we seem to have risen as ego and therefore to be aware of ourselves as I am this body, only because we've never actually looked at ourselves carefully enough. That's why Bhagavan often said, when people ask, how or why did ego come into existence? Bhagavan said, because of avichara. That is actually, avichara means non-investigation. That's not actually why ego came into existence. What Bhagavan implied by saying that is, ego seems to exist because of avichara. We seem to be ego because we haven't investigated ourselves. If we investigate ourselves clearly enough, it'll be clear that we were never ego. So why we seem to be ego is because we haven't investigated ourselves. Avichara means non-investigation. So all we need to do is to investigate ourselves, to look deep within, to see what we actually are, and then it'll be clear we never were ego. That recognition of what we actually are and the resulting understanding that we were never ego is what is metaphorically described as the dying of I. That question wasn't actually about these verses of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, but it's still it's important to understand these things. That is, if we want to understand Bhagavan's verses fully, we shouldn't take verses in isolation. We should read the verses and we should understand them in the light of other verses, because then we get a more comprehensive understanding of what Bhagavan is saying.
The next question is verse 970. And the question is, what power of grace is required to keep one's attention abiding in the I am? And what are the signs that the ego is subsiding into this beautiful presence?
Okay, the grace is always available. The problem is that we are like the person immersed in the neck deep in the Ganga who doesn't know how to quench their thirst. That is, the grace is ever shining within us as our own being. All we need to do is turn within. So we need to do our part, which is turning within. Grace will do everything else. However, even to say we need to, I mean, we do need to do our part, because so long as we have the sense of doership, we need to do this. But when we actually turn within, we will find that the power that made us turn within is nothing but the power of grace. We can understand this if we think carefully about it. That is, as Bhagavan says, well, as he implies in verse 25 of Uludunapadu, the very nature of ego is to cling to things other than itself. Without clinging to things other than itself, or clinging to form as he expresses it there, ego cannot rise, it cannot stand, and it cannot flourish. So the very nature of ego is to always cling to other things. So the nature of ego is to have Vishaya Vasanas. Vishaya Vasanas means the inclination to cling to Vishayas. Vishayas means objects or phenomena, what Bhagavan refers to in that verse as forms. So any object or phenomena is a form or a Vishaya. Because we as ego cannot survive for a moment without constantly clinging to forms or Vishayas, we have very strong Vishaya Vasana. This is the nature of ego. In order to know ourselves, we need to have great love to hold on to our own being and thereby to let go of all these phenomena. That love to hold on to our own being is contrary to the very nature of ego. So from where can that love come? It cannot come from ego because it's contrary to the nature of ego. It can only come from the reality of ego. The reality of ego means what we actually are. That is our own being. That is grace. So even when our attention is going outwards, grace is working in our heart. As Bhagavan said, grace works both from inside and outside. Outside, it's giving us, it's allotting to us the fruit of our past karmas, which we experience in the form of our Praarabda, our fate. So all the experiences of life are given to us in such a way to that whatever we're given to experience in each life is the fruit of our past actions, but not a random selection. That is what is selected for us to experience is those experiences that will be most conducive to giving us the love to turn within. So from outside, through every experience of our life, grace is giving us an inward push. And inwardly, it is giving us the clarity to understand that the happiness we are all seeking, the happiness that we seek it's our very nature to seek happiness. We cannot avoid seeking happiness. The problem is we're seeking happiness in the wrong place. We're seeking happiness in things outside ourselves. So grace gives us the clarity to understand that the happiness we're seeking does not lie in external things, it lies within. So so long as we are rising as ego, we have to be told, you have to do your part. I think it was probably at the end of last month, I talked about another verse of Guru Vācaka Kōvai. Wait a second, I'll just get it. That was, I think, 696. It was in a different part of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, but it's very relevant to this, where Bhagavan says, that is, two analogies are often given for how we can be saved, basically. One analogy is the analogy of a baby monkey. The baby monkey holds tightly to its mother, and the mother jumps from tree to tree. Because she's jumping from tree to tree, she can't be holding on to the baby, so the baby has to hold on to her. And the other analogy that is given is the analogy of a kitten. The kitten is totally dependent on its mother. So it will just meow, 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 and the mother will come. If it's in danger, the mother will come, pick it up in her mouth. She'll pick it up by the scruff of its neck, and she'll carry it to safety. So these are the two analogies that are given. So what Bhagavan says in this verse is, those who have attained jnana siddhi, the attainment of jnana in this very life, when attachment has ceased, by the power of God's grace, without any effort, by the blemishless cat principle, are those who have practiced devotion in former lives like a monkey. That is, ultimately, we are all going to be saved, like the kitten is saved by the mother, who comes and picks it up. But until that point where we are completely surrendered and we depend completely on him, till that point we have to cling to him with devotion, with firm love. So we have to do our part, clinging to clinging to God, who is ever shining in our heart as our own being. I am. So we have to do that. But even the liking to cling to him in our heart, even that is done by grace. So eventually, when salvation is actually attained, those who have attained that, who have attained liberation, they all say, I didn't do anything. It was grace alone that did everything. As Bhagavan often said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It is grace that draws us to this spiritual path. It is grace that motivates us to pursue this physical path. And eventually it is grace that will swallow us. So ultimately it's all done by grace. But because grace is not something other than ourselves, that grace works through us. So the effort we make to turn within, to try to know ourselves as we actually are, that effort is grace working through us. But because so long as we rise as ego, we have that sense of doership. So because we have that sense of doership, we have to try to turn within. By trying to turn within, we are thereby yielding ourselves to grace. Because grace is trying to pull us within. The normal inclination of ego is to be constantly going outward. So we're constantly resisting that inward pull of grace. So by trying to turn within and attend to ourselves, we are yielding ourselves to that inner pull of grace. But even the liking to try to turn within, that is done by grace. So ultimately, it's all done by grace. But we shouldn't just sit there, okay, I'll wait till grace does it. In the meanwhile, I'll go on doing whatever I like to do. No, that's exactly what we shouldn't be doing. We need to hold tight like that baby monkey. If we let go, we're going to fall and get ourselves into all sorts of trouble. So we need to hold on firmly, and he will do everything else. Even our holding on firmly is actually being done by him, but from our perspective, it seems that we are making an effort, and we have to make that effort to turn within. Because otherwise, the nature of ego is to go outwards. The ego will constantly be going out under the sway of its Vishaya vasanas, unless we make that we, as ego, make the effort to turn within and hold on to him firmly in our heart. If we do that, he will do everything else. Even that bit that we're doing, even that is ultimately, we will see that it is done only by him. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
There is a follow-up to that one. What is the purpose of ego as the absolute perfection?
The purpose of ego is to dissolve itself. That is, in the ultimate analysis, there's no purpose of ego. Ego is, but since we've risen as ego, what should be our purpose as ego? To merge back into the source from which we've risen. And when we do merge back into the source from which we've risen, we will know that we have never risen. And therefore, the question of the purpose of ego doesn't arise, because there's no such thing as ego at all. But so long as we seem to have risen, so long as we're aware of all this multiplicity, so long as we're suffering this embodied existence, our sole purpose should be to try to turn within and thereby surrender ourselves completely to what we actually are, our own being. So we need to merge back into our being.
Yeah, the comment on that from the person asking the question is, can I suggest the purpose of ego is to learn to love the unlovable?
No, what is the most lovable thing of all? The one thing that we all love is ourself. But one thing we love above all, as Bhagavan says, the greatest love is always for oneself. Even when we love other things, we love them because they contribute to our happiness. Even if we're very altruistic, even if we're always trying to help others, even if we're living a very selfless life, trying to always to help others, even that is motivated by our love for ourselves, because we get satisfaction out of serving others. So ultimately, it's said in the Upanishad, the love for others is all because of a love for Atman, for oneself. We love ourselves above all other things. So what we are trying to love is not the unlovable. What we are trying to love is the one thing that we always love. The problem is, there's no wrong with self-love, but the problem is, because we take ourselves to be this person, we have so much love for this person and we neglect what we actually are. So we need to need to make use of our self-love and use it wisely. Rather than loving what we seem to be, we need to love what we actually are. In other words, we need to love our own being. And that it is the love for our own being is the grace manifesting in our heart. That is that love for our own being. That itself is grace. When Bhagavan had his death experience, if a fear of death comes to us, the normal reaction of the mind is to go outwards and cling to all the things to which we're most attached. So, for example, it is said people who have nearly drowned, they say, but while they were when they were almost drowning, all their past memories of their loved ones, their all the important events in their life, everything was coming before their mind. That is, the mind is going outwards and clinging to all the things that it identifies with. My parents, my siblings, my family, my identity, my community, my religion, whatever it is, it's all things that we identify with. In the case of Bhagavan, that isn't what happened. But when that fear of death came to Bhagavan, his fear was not to lose any of these things. His fear was to lose his own very being, because that was his fear. He turned his attention within to know, who am I? And thereby ego dissolved forever. So it is that only when we have great clarity will we understand that what we actually all that what we should be fearing is not well. Of course, we can never cease to exist. What actually exists must always exist, and what doesn't always exist doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. But it's the we shouldn't be concerned about that. That is because of our rising as ego. We identify ourselves as this person, and therefore we identify ourselves with. We identify. This is my family, my parents, my wife, my husband, my children, my this, my job, my identity, my place in society, my community, my nationality, my religion, my this, my that. All this is centered in this dehabhimana, this attachment to ourself as a body. And this is the Maya, this is the bondage we're all facing. So we need to change our attachment to this attachment to what we seem to be. We need to change that to attachment to what we actually are. In other words, we need to attach ourselves to our own being. That is the way to be saved. Because all these other things, all that we identify with, these are all transient phenomena. This person we take ourselves to be, this person is going to live only for a certain number of years. Sooner or later, this person is going to die. So what we now take ourselves to be it's a fleeting phenomena. And everything that we, all our parents, our children, our husbands, our wives, our friends, our relatives, our nationality, our religion, all these things, these are all going to be, we're going to be separated from all these things. So, but one thing we can never be separated from is our own being. So that is what we need to love. That is what we need to hold on to.
There are some questions linked to grace, which are about grace and something
Yes,
else.
yes, okay, that's good.
Okay. So the question is, does turning within to follow Satvasana cancel out Praarabdha, or do we have to experience all Praarabdha regardless of whether divine grace pulls us back within through self-inquiry? Perhaps you'll say we still have to experience Praarabdha, but we won't get pulled in and affected by thinking it's real. But I'm asking, can it cancel the Praarabdha completely?
Praarabdha is for whom? That is, Bhagavan says very clearly Bhagavan answers this question very clearly in verse 38 of Uludunapadu. Vinay mudal nam ayin, vile payan tuipom. If we are a doer of action, we will experience the resulting fruit. So long as we rise as ego, we identify ourselves with this mind and body, and therefore all the actions of mind, speech, and body are experienced by us as I am doing it. So long as we rise as ego, we are in effect the doer of action. And therefore we have to experience the resulting fruit. So that will continue so long as we rise as ego. Therefore, in the next sentence, he says, investigating who is the doer of action, when one knows oneself, doership will depart and all the three actions will slip off. That is, when we, instead of attending to whatever is given to us to experience in Praarabdha, if we turn our attention within to see what we actually are, that's what Bhagavan means by investigating who is the doer of action. Who is this I who is risen to do all these actions and experience the fruit? We would thereby know ourselves. And when we know ourselves as we actually are, the doership will be thereby be dissolved, because doership is the nature of ego. When ego is dissolved, both doership and experiencership are dissolved. Here he just says doership will depart. That implies, along with the doership, that experiencership will depart. And in the absence of a doer of karma and an experiencer of the fruit of karma, all the three karmas will cease to exist. All the three karmas means agamya, which is the actual karma. That's what we do under the sway of our vasanas. The fruit of what we do under the sway of our vasanas, the fruit of the agamya, gets stored in sanchita. Sanchita means a heap or pile. That's all the fruit of our past actions that we haven't yet experienced. And Praarabdha, the destiny, is that portion of the sanchita that has been selected for us to experience in this lifetime. So the only way to free ourselves from Praarabdha is to free ourselves from ego, who is the doer of the action and the experience of the fruit of the action. Without ego, there can be no Praarabdha. Bhagavan makes that very, very clear. So all the three karmas will cease to exist only when ego ceases to exist. And ego will cease to exist only when we know ourselves. And we will know ourselves as we actually are, that is. And we'll know ourselves as we actually are only when we investigate, who am I? The doer of action, the experiencer of its fruit. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
So there's a follow-up to that question, which is, so this can all be accomplished by divine grace pulling us within.
Yes, but part of the process of divine grace pulling us within, that divine grace works through us. So we have to make the effort to turn within, because if we're not making the effort to turn within, we'll be going outwards, and going outwards is resisting the inward pull of grace. So we've got to cooperate with grace by trying our best to turn within.
The next question is, does surrender include not knowing the source or depth of grace itself?
No, the more we surrender, the more we will know the real nature of grace. And the more we know the real nature of grace, the more we will surrender. And the complete surrender is when we merge back into our own being, which is the very fullness of grace.
So the first question is, from my understanding of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, there is one reality, which is awareness of awareness. I, the self, which is also called the heart. But essentially, all are just words to describe that all is based upon inwardness, complete and total. And this is one consciousness. There cannot be a second. Yet I cannot hear your thoughts. Why? Is it that there are no others? What is Bhagavan's explanation, please? And also, that awareness is Brahman, is omnipresent. So there is no we, but that it, Brahman, is both space-like yet also beyond space, as I am. Space and time not being real. Do I have some understanding down? Thank you. I like how Nisargadatta has said, abandon false ideas, that is all. There is no need of true ideas. There aren't any.
Okay, one thing we need to understand is the nature of awareness. The real nature of awareness is being aware of what actually is. What actually is only awareness. So the real awareness is that awareness that knows nothing other than itself. That is the one reality. That awareness, that is what Bhagavan calls Sutatra Aribu. I translate that in English as intransitive awareness. In other words, awareness that is not knowing any objects or any phenomena. Awareness that's knowing only its own being. And of course, its own being is not an object for it to know. So it's that pure awareness, pure self-awareness, that is the real awareness. The awareness that knows things other than ourself is what Bhagavan called Sutaribu. That means, literally, Suttu means pointing out or showing. So that awareness that knows objects, that knows phenomena, that is not the real awareness. The awareness that knows objects or phenomena is what is called ego. So ego is that awareness that knows things other than itself. Whereas pure awareness is the awareness that knows nothing other than itself. Of course, these are not two different awarenesses, but pure awareness is awareness as it actually is. Ego is that same awareness mixed and conflated with adjuncts as I am this body. That is the significance of Bhagavan saying, but the real awareness is what is aware of itself as I am I. This is often translated in English as I, often I-I, but that is not the meaning intended. The Tamil term nan, or Sanskrit term aham, doesn't mean just I, it means I am I. That is it's the nature of Tamil and Sanskrit that if you're saying A is B, the copula, the verb is usually omitted. So if you say, for example, nana, that literally means I who, but the am is understood there. I am who, or who am I? or nan idu, I this, means I am this. So when Bhagavan says nan nan, it means I am I. So the pure awareness is aware of itself as itself alone, and it's not aware of anything else. Whereas when we rise as ego, we're not aware of ourselves as I am I, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am this person. In other words, we identify ourselves with objects or phenomena, and consequently we're aware of other things. So the question why we cannot hear others' thoughts, knowing our own thoughts or knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance. So knowing the thoughts of others will be even greater ignorance. I mean, it'd be compounding our ignorance. So our aim isn't to know others' thoughts or to know anything other than ourselves. Our aim is just to know ourselves, because knowing nothing other than ourselves actually exists. So when we know other things, we know them as if they're existing. So knowing what doesn't actually exist, as if it's existing, is ignorance. So knowing, as Bhagavan says in verse 13 of Uludunapadu, Jnanamam Tane Me. That means oneself who is awareness alone is real. There, jnanam, awareness, implies pure awareness, the awareness that knows nothing other than itself. That alone is what is real. And then he says, Nanavam jnanam ajnanamam, the awareness that experiences manyness. The literal meaning is awareness, the awareness that is manyness. In other words, but it implies the awareness that sees that one reality as many things, that is ignorance. So knowing anything other than ourselves is ignorance. So our aim is only to know ourselves and not to know anything else. That is why the only way to know ourselves is to attend to ourselves. And to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we thereby withdraw our attention from all other things. So when it is said that Brahman, well, firstly, it said, so there is no we, but that is Brahman. No, that's a misunderstanding. There's no such thing as Brahman other than we. We are Brahman. And that is, there's no, Brahman is not a second thing. It is only our own being. It is what we actually are. So we alone are. Bhagavan makes, that's why he says in that verse 13 of Ulunapdu, Jnanamam Tane Me, oneself who is awareness alone is real. So we alone are what is real. It isn't said, well, we can read it as saying that space, that Brahman is space-like. It's sometimes referred to as Chidakasa. Chidakasa means the space of awareness. In a sense, we can say that, but it's not really like anything. It is beyond all. We can't compare it with anything. The reason we talk about it, it's often referred to as Chidakasa. There's a reason for this. That is, the physical space is called Buddhakasa. The whole physical space, in other words, this entire universe, which space does it exist in? It exists only in the space of our own mind. That is, it has no existence independent of our view of it, our perception of it, or our conception of it. So we conceive that there's a vast space out there, and it's so many billions of light years and everything. All these ideas about the vastness of physical space, it's all in our own mind. And whatever space we see, we may have a view of several miles away and be able to see, if we look up in the sky at night, we can see stars that may be hundreds of light years away. But all that space, it's all only within our own mind. So the physical space exists in the mind space. And where does the mind space exist? Only in the infinite space of consciousness. So it's not literally space, but it's a way of understanding that that is the one ultimate reality in which all things appear, all other things appear and disappear. All other things appear and disappear only in the view of ego, which itself appears and disappears in the infinite space of pure awareness. And that pure awareness is what we always experience as our own being, I am. So yes, and then the next sentence says time and space are not real. Yes, that's true. Do I have some understanding? Well, yes, within what I've said. I mean, I tried to clarify certain things. So if you've understood all this, yes, then you do have some understanding. Regarding the statement of Nisargadatta, which is recommended at the end, I mean, that is referred to at the end, abandon false ideas, that is all. There's no need of true ideas, there aren't any. How can we abandon false ideas? The very nature of ego, ego is the first thought, the thought I. All other thoughts appear only in the view of ego. So long as we rise as ego, we will have thoughts or ideas. And all thoughts or ideas ultimately are false because they appear only in the view of ego, which itself is false. But we can't abandon other thoughts. Well, we may be able to, every night when we fall asleep, we abandon all thoughts, all ideas, all false ideas or true ideas, whatever. We abandon all ideas, but that's only temporary. So merely abandoning thoughts is not our aim, because if you abandon thoughts, so long as ego remains, sooner or later ego will rise again and the thoughts will come along with it. So in order to abandon all ideas, whether true or false, we need not concern ourselves whether they're true or false. In order to abandon them, we need to abandon the root of all thoughts. That is ego. Ego, as Bhagavan said, is a thought. But it's a thought unlike all other thoughts, because all other thoughts are jada. That is, they're devoid of awareness. So no other thought knows itself. Thoughts are known only by ego. So ego is the one thought that knows itself and that consequently knows other things. So that is the false idea. And ego is the false thought, or the thought we need to get rid of. So trying to abandon other false ideas is not going to get us very far, because some idea or other will always be coming. And even to say all ideas are false and there are no true ideas, even that's not actually very helpful to us, because we have to discriminate. Ultimately, all ideas are unreal. But among the unreal thoughts, some are true in the sense that they're pointing towards what is ultimately real. So, for example, Bhagavan teaches us, but we're not this body, but the world is not real. For us, these are just ideas. But we can't just say, oh, these are their ideas, therefore they're not true. They may not be real in the sense that they don't actually exist. But so long as we experience ideas, we need to discriminate between ideas that are false in the sense that they're pointing in the wrong direction, and ideas that are true in the sense that they're pointing in the true direction. So, for example, if I say there's no such thing as climate change, it's just a myth, it's a hoax or something, that is obviously false. If I say no, there is climate change, that, relatively speaking, that's true. We can't deny it. So we need, so long as we're in the realm of ideas, we need to distinguish true ideas from false ideas. Ultimately, all ideas are unreal. But just to say, therefore, there are no true ideas is not going to help us, because the teachings we are given are themselves ideas, but they're ideas that are pointing us in the right direction. So what we need to abandon is not just, we need to abandon the one who has all ideas, whether true or false. That is, the true ideas are those ideas that direct us back to investigate ourselves, who are the one to whom all thoughts, all ideas, whether true or false, they all occur to whom? To me. Who am I? We need to investigate what we ourselves actually are. So what Nisargadatta says may sound very nice, but it's not actually there's not much substance in it if we think about it. What we need to abandon is ego. And since ego is a false awareness of ourselves, we can't just decide, I'm going to abandon ego, because the I that wants to abandon ego is itself the ego. We can eradicate ego only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. That is, ego is the false awareness I in this body. What we actually are is the pure awareness I am I. So we need to know ourselves as we actually are and thereby get rid of ego. When we get rid of ego, then we get rid of all ideas, whether true or false. So I hope that's a helpful answer to that question.
The next question is, what is the difference between sanskaras and vasanas? I have a restless mind. Should I straight away start with self-inquiry, or should I first develop concentration by means like fixing attention on an image or mantra japa?
The first question first, what's the difference between samskaras and vasanas? Both these words have a range of meanings, but where their meanings overlap is that they both they are both used to refer to volitional inclinations. What Bhagavan Bhagavan talked of Vishaya Vasanas and Satvasana. But Vishaya Vasana is the inclination to seek happiness in and to experience Vishayas, objects or phenomena, whereas Satvasana is the inclination to seek happiness in our own being. These vasanas are also called samskaras. But both these words, they're not synonymous in all contexts. They're synonymous in this context, but vasanas, for example, vasana means a smell. So in that sense, it's not synonymous with samskara. Samskara also refers to certain rituals and other things. So these both terms have a range of meanings, but their meanings overlap when referring to volitional inclinations, which is the sense in which Bhagavan uses the term vasanas. He also, some places he used the term samskaras, but because the two are synonymous in this context. So there's no difference between them in this context. Regarding I have a restless mind, show me someone who doesn't have a restless mind. The very nature of the mind is to be restless. So we all, it's the nature of the mind to be restless. Some of us may have more restless minds than others. When the mind is under the sway of Rajoguna, it tends to be more restless. When it's under the sway of Sattva Guna, it's less restless, but it's all just relative. The nature of the mind is to be restless to a greater or lesser extent. So we all face the same problem. Should I straight away start with self-inquiry, or should I first develop concentration by means like fixing attention on an image or mantra japa? Bhagavan never prescribed anything. If people wanted to follow other paths, Bhagavan would encourage them in their own way. But if people ask Bhagavan, what should I do? He will always recommend self-inquiry, because this is the direct means. And other means can purify the mind and thereby very indirectly lead to this path of self-inquiry. But self-inquiry, self-investigation, this is the ultimate path. So it's up to us. Do we want to go in a roundabout way, seeking purification of mind by other means, or do we want to go the direct means by self-inquiry? Bhagavan clearly said this is This is the direct path for all. So this path is open to everyone. Anyone who wants to know what they actually are, this is the path. This is the direct means. Many people don't take to the path of self-investigation because they're not interested. Many people, they prefer, and I prefer just, I prefer bhakti, I prefer to sing the praises, to recite stotras, or to do japa, everything. That's fine. But ultimately, if we want to be liberated, we have to come to this path of self-investigation. All these other practices, these practices of bhakti, as Bhagavan makes clear in Upadesha, these, if they are done not for gaining any, not for any desired end, but just for the love of God, they will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. The fact he says purify the mind and show the way to liberation clearly implies that they are not the way to they themselves are not the way to liberation, but they're like tributaries. By purifying the mind, they can lead us to the path of self-investigation. But we all need to purify our mind. But what is the most effective means to purify the mind? Bhagavan made very clear, there's no means to purify the mind as effective as self-investigation. So self-investigation is the most effective means to purify the mind, and it's the only means to eradicate the mind, to destroy the mind entirely. So why not take to self? Once we've come to Bhagavan and if we read his teachings, if we understand his teachings, interest in other practices will naturally wane. But ultimately, whatever other practices we do, we have to come to this path of self-investigation. That doesn't mean we should never repeat God's name, we should never do japa or anything. It doesn't mean that. But even while we're doing japa, we should try to be fixing our attention. That is, when we do japa, we're repeating the name of God. So whatever name of God we choose, that God is what is shining in our heart as our own being. Supposing we choose a mantra like Hare Krishna or something. Who is that Krishna? He himself says in the Gita, I am Atman, in the heart of all living beings, and the beginning, the middle, and the end of living beings. So if we want to fix our mind on Krishna, rather than fixing our mind merely on the form of Krishna, we should fix our mind on Atman. So and that applies to any God, because all these different names and forms of God, ultimately they're different names and forms of the one God. God is not many, there's only one God. God may appear in any number of forms, but the reality, what God actually is our own being shining in our heart as I. So the best way to meditate on God is to meditate on I. In other words, to practice self-investigation. So sometimes if we're in a mood to repeat the name of God, Namo Ramanaya, or whatever it is, or Arunachal Shiva, or Namah Shivaya, or Hare Krishna, or whatever it is, there's so many different mantras for different God. Ultimately, we should remember the God whose name we're repeating is what is shining in our heart as our own being. So rather than, I mean, as I say, it's not that we should avoid doing other practices, but the heart of whatever practice we should do is to fix our attention on ourselves. And to fix our attention on ourselves, we don't need to do japa. We don't need to, all we need is to fix our attention on ourselves. Sometimes if we're not feeling so much inspired to attend to ourselves, we can repeat, we can just sing Ramana, 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 and that itself will give us, if we really understood Bhagavan, if we really love Bhagavan, that'll inspire us to try to attend to ourselves. Because who is Ramana? Ramana is what is Arihati Tarajivara Dahavari Jagohail Arivai Rami Paramatman Arunachala Ramanan. He himself says, Arunachala Ramana is Paramatma, which blissfully exists as awareness in the heart, in the cave of the heart lotus of all different jivas, beginning with Hari. Hari means Lord Vishnu himself. So from the highest God to the lowest insect, what is shining as Paramatma in the heart of all, that is Arunachala Ramana. So exactly what Krishna says in Gita, Aham Atma, Bhagavan says he Paramatma. Atma, Paramatma, all are one and the same in this context. So it's the same one reality. It's there in our heart. So if we have real love for God and real understanding of the nature of God, we'll naturally be drawn to this practice of self-investigation over and above all other practices. So, simple answer, should I start straight away with self-inquiry? It's not a matter of should, there's no compulsion. But if we are wise, we will take to this practice from the outset.
Yeah, the next question is, I'm unable to discriminate between the pointing out awareness or mind's perception region from myself, the personality, even though I can see I'm not just the body, I'm something embodied which depends on this body for its sustenance, but I'm unable to take the leap. Secondly, when I sit and try self-investigation, it seems superficial because I know certainly that I am this person embodied in this body, but the incentive of infinite bliss pushes me further, and I feign to understand what Bhagavan meant by self-investigation, although I harbor no doubt as to elicit this question, who am I? I try not to follow any particular routine. I just sit and let what comes come and let what goes go. While sitting, all sorts of things, uh, all sorts of things come seemingly. I perceive them and most of the time flow with them, and suddenly there is acknowledgement of attention slipping away, and it comes back and it goes away. It goes on like this, and all of a sudden I begin to sweat. And the body becomes hot, and I feel as if I'm being suffocated. And simultaneously, the pointers pop. Discriminate who is experiencing this, to whom is this happening. But by that time, attention has gone away, and I have to feign again, like that fear was separate. Um, I am Rahul, and I am turning 26 next month. I have been attempting meditation for the past few years. Um, though my effort has been minimal. During the early honeymoon period of practice, as David Godman calls it, it brought me peace and seemed easy because I was focused on meditation, not self-investigation. My practice eventually stopped due to a fear of suffocation and has remained stagnant since. Recently, I was reintroduced to Bhagwan's teachings and have been trying to understand self-investigation, though to no avail. It has been neither easy nor peaceful, as I often find myself anticipating the end result while feigning actual practice. The fear of suffocation always creeps up during prolonged periods, so I stopped again. However, this itch for infinite bliss keeps me scavenging through scriptures and the diligent work of others on Mahatmas like Bhagwan or Ramakrishna Paramhans. I admit I admit I have been taking their hard-earned insights and acting as if they were my own. I have been doing this recently with Sir Michael's insights, but sending that previous email made me realize I was being a phony. I had been pretending that I was beyond embarrassment and only a click away from discarding my personal identity. Despite this, my questions were genuine. I reach this point frequently. I reach this point frequently, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, or maybe just to sustain the facade that I am progressing at least at something, despite the case that insights I borrowed from Sir Michael have truly helped me manage my anticipation.
Okay, there's a lot there. The first thing, unable to discriminate between the pointing out awareness or mind's perception region from myself personality, even though I can see I'm not just the body. That is, what is aware of itself as I am this body, and that is consequently aware of other things, that is what Bhagavan called Suttaribuva, pointing out awareness. in other words, the awareness of things other than ourself. That is what is called ego or mind. So knowing anything other than ourself, that is the nature of ego. Our real nature is knowing nothing other than ourself. So how to separate ourselves from ego and remain as we actually are, it is by attending to ourself alone. So long as we attend to anything other than ourself, we are nourishing and sustaining ego. To the extent to which we attend to ourself, we are thereby bringing about the subsidence and eventual dissolution of ego, permanent dissolution of ego. So the actual practice of self-investigation is extremely simple. Bhagavan defined what he meant by self-investigation in the 16th paragraph of Nana. Sadakalamam manate atmavil vetirabadu. That means fixing or keeping the mind on oneself, always keeping the mind on oneself. That alone is Atma-vichara. That is what the name Atma-vichara refers to. So all we need to do is to try to keep our attention on ourself. Questions like who am I or to whom is this, these are useful pointers, but actually Bhagavan didn't tell us to ask the question who am I or to ask to whom. He said investigate to whom. Investigate who am I. Investigating to whom means when anything else appears, when our attention slips away from ourselves towards anything else, that other thing appears in our awareness. So to whom does it appear? That when he says investigate to whom, he means we have to turn our attention away from whatever appears back towards ourself, the one to whom it appears. And having turned our attention back to ourself, we then need to try to hold on to that self-attentiveness. That is what he refers to as investigating who am I. Holding on to self-attentiveness is investigating who am I. When our attention slips away and we try to turn it back to ourselves, that is what he describes as investigating to whom. This clue to whom, it's a very, very useful clue because it's the nature of the mind to be distracted by things other than itself. But a very powerful means to turn our attention back to ourselves is to understand that whatever appears, it appears to whom? To me. So we can instantly, that is, rather than taking the appearance of thoughts or perceptions or memories or anything, rather than taking these as obstacles, we can take these as reminders to turn our attention back to ourselves. So when we sit or try to, it's not necessary to sit, but sometimes we may sit or comfortably to try to fix our attention on ourselves. Our aim is only to attend to ourselves. We are not to let what comes come and let go what goes goes. We are not concerned. Let anything come or go. We are not concerned about it. Our only concern is to attend to ourselves. Because some people think simply sitting there, watching the flow of thoughts, that is self-investigation. No, attending to anything other than ourselves is not Atma-vichara, it's Anatma-vichara. We are attending to what is not ourself. So what we need to attend to is ourself alone. So when ourself means not any object or any phenomena, the awareness to whom all these things appear, that is what we are. That is what we need to attend to. Of course, the awareness that attend to whom all these things appear is ego. But if we attend to ego, ego will subside, and the underlying reality of ego, what ego actually is, will shine forth. That is pure awareness. So don't worry about the fact that, I mean, whatever I say is what I've learned from Bhagavan. So it's not a matter of pretending that I'm claiming Bhagavan's insights as my insights, but having studied Bhagavan carefully and having tried to put what Bhagavan says into practice, I'm very, very convinced by his teachings, and that is necessary. We need to have a strong conviction. This is what is called Shraddha. Shraddha is sometimes translated as faith, and it is faith faith in the sense of trust, but it's not just a blind trust. We're not. Bhagavan never asks us to believe anything just on blind faith. The faith we need to have is a faith based on clarity. So we need to study Bhagavan carefully, imbibe his teachings, imbibe the insights that he gives us, and put them into practice. So we don't have to worry that whatever we have understood it's not our own insights that we got from Bhagavan. That doesn't matter. What matters is applying what we've learned from Bhagavan, applying it in practice. So we can say any of us can say we're phony. None of us, our love to turn within and know ourselves is deficient. We will all have to admit that. But the only way to make this deficient love grow into full love is to persevere in the practice. So let's not worry about anything. Let's not worry about whether these are our insights or whether we've really understood them. Let us try our best to put them into practice. And the greatest aid in this practice is to have a clear understanding of Bhagavan's teachings. So often reading Bhagavan's teachings, thinking about his teachings, a great aid to actually putting it into practice. But most important of all, that is no amount of reading and Sravana Manana, reading and thinking about it, no amount of that is a substitute for practice. Practice is what is most important, but it's a great aid to the practice. So don't be discouraged. Just keep on trying. Try your best to turn your attention within towards yourself as much as you can. That's all that matters. And as far as honeymoon period is concerned, it's, I don't know if it's really useful thinking in those terms. That is, if we really understand, at first when we begin to practice, we probably don't have a very good understanding of what we practice. So it may seem easy at first, but once we really understand what is required, which is to keep our attention fixed on ourselves, it's never, well, it is easy in a sense. Bhagavan said knowing ourselves is easy. It's easy because it's what's ever available for us. But so long as we have strong Vishaya vasanas, it seems difficult to hold on to self-attentiveness. The reason it's that having strong Vishaya vasanas means we have a strong liking to attend to other things. And because that strong liking to attend to other things, our liking to attend to ourselves is deficient. So because of why this practice of self-investigation seems difficult, it seems difficult to hold on to self-attentiveness. It seems difficult to avoid being distracted by other things, to hold on to our self-attentiveness so firmly that we don't allow ourselves to be distracted by other things. It seems difficult, but it seems difficult only because of our lack of love for this. If we really had love to attend to ourselves, this is the easiest of all things. There's nothing easier than attending to ourselves. But it seems difficult because of our lack of love for this. We have more liking to experience things other than ourselves than to experience ourselves. So it will seem difficult for all of us, but it's not that attending to ourselves is actually difficult. The difficulty lies in our lack of love for that, rather in our contrary love, our love to attend to other things. So to overcome these Vishaya vasanas, these strong inclinations to attend to other things, the only way is to persevere in the practice. So don't be worried, don't worry about anything else. Just keep on trying to the best, as much as we each can. We need to try to attend to ourselves. That's all that is required. There's a sentence in the 11th paragraph of Nana in which Bhagavan says, Oruvan tan sarupam adeyam variyal, nirantara swarupa smaranaye kai patruvanayan adu andre podam. That's a very encouraging sentence. What he says is, if until one attains Swarupa, in other words, until we know ourselves as we actually are, Swarupa means what we actually are, till we attain Swarupa, if one holds on to uninterrupted self-remembrance, Swarupa Smarana, that alone is sufficient. So we need to try as much as possible, whatever else we may be doing, that is, whatever we may be doing, who is doing it? I am doing it. So we're always aware of our own being. The problem is we overlook our own being because we're more interested in attending to other things. So we need to try to hold on to a remembrance of our own being. If we do that, that alone is sufficient, Bhagavan says. Because the more we hold on to that remembrance of our being, the more we will naturally sink within. Sometimes people ask, is it necessary to sit in meditation, or can we be doing this throughout the day? Well, what is most important is to try to hold on to this. If we have time to set aside for trying to go a bit deeper within, that's certainly beneficial. We should take every opportunity to try to go within. But what is most important is trying to hold on to self-attentiveness throughout the day as much as possible, whatever else we may be doing. And only if we do that will we have the strength to go deep within at the times when we able to set aside for sitting or closing our eyes or whatever. I mean, all these things are not necessary, but the practice throughout the day will help us to go deeper within. If we simply think that we can go deep within by sitting for meditation 10 minutes morning, 10 minutes evening, or whatever, we're not going to go very deep within. If the extent to which we go deep within depends on how much we try to hold on to that self-attentiveness throughout the day. That's why Bhagavan said in that sentence about holding on to self-remembrance, he says nirantara swarupa smarana. That means uninterrupted swarupa, unbroken swarupa smarana. And when he defines what he means by Atma-vichara, he says sada kalamam, always. So that of course, none of us succeed in that, but that should be our aim. We should be trying to hold on to self-attentiveness, to keep our mind fixed on ourselves, always, to the extent possible. So I hope that's a helpful answer, Rahul. So don't keep things simple. All you have to do is to try to attend to yourself as much as possible.
Michael, we have, I think, about 6 or 7 questions.
Yeah, sorry. My answer.
No, it's just that, yeah.
Yeah. But particularly ones that are about the practice of self-investigation, because this is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. They're all ultimately pointing back to this need for us to practice this. So I tend to get carried away when I talk about that.
Should I sort of focus on the questions which are on self-inquiry, self-attention, or?
No, let's just finish these ones by email, because otherwise, and then we can do other ones.
Okay. So the next one is, I'm listening to the video dated 26th of August 2023, Ramana Maharshi Foundation UK. And this is about, why is this entire world as unreal as a dream? While explaining what Bhagavan meant by reality, you mentioned the 3 defining characteristics of reality, according to Bhagavan, as eternal, unchanging, and and self-shining at 16:09 minutes. And you mentioned that other than the ego, nothing is aware of itself. All phenomena is devoid of awareness. I understand that Bhagavan mentions this in multiple places in Upadesh Undiyar and Uladunarpadu as well. But somehow I'm always confused about it, and maybe because of that, I'm not able to separate the subject from all the objects or the phenomena, which is the first step to do self-investigation. Can we define something as being unaware of itself, that is devoid of self-awareness, as follows? Anything that appears and disappears is not aware of itself, since it appears in the view of something that is self-aware. Though they, that is any living being, appear as though aware, but we don't know for sure that they are aware as they appear and disappear in our view. I mean, in ego's view, just like in a dream. So we cannot be sure of the phenomena, which is nothing but thoughts appearing in the view of the ego, might be self-aware. Is my understanding going in the right direction? Can you please clarify this?
Yes, yes, this is going in the right direction. But one thing we need to understand is, um, I mean, Bhagavan very clearly taught that our life in this world is just a dream. In a dream, there is just one dreamer. Who is the one dreamer? The one who is experiencing the dream. So we are the dream. We as ego are the dreamer. So long as we're dreaming, we perceive a multiplicity of other sentient beings, both human and non-human. I mean, so animals and human beings. In our view, they all appear to be sentient. They all appear to be conscious. So long as we're interacting with this world, obviously that is all the other people that is, we as ego mistake ourselves to be a person. Because we mistake ourselves to be a person, it seems to us that this person is aware. So every other person seems to be aware. The awareness we infer, or we can almost say we see it. We don't actually experience the awareness, but we as if we experience the awareness. We see. I mean, it's it's it looks very obvious to us when we're talking to someone or when we're watching an animal behaving that there's awareness there. That's how it seems to be, and obviously the um, the the other people are as aware as the person we seem to be. But when we are practicing Bhagavan's teachings, we need to go deeper than this. Because I take myself to be Michael, it seems to me that Michael is aware. And because Michael seems to be aware, every other person seems to be aware. But actually, Michael is not aware. What is aware is ego, the I that is aware of itself as I am Michael. So the truth is, no person is aware. It's the ego that is aware of itself as I am this person and consequently seems to be aware. So as far as interacting with the world is concerned, we take ourselves to be a person when we interact with the world, and therefore all other people seem to be aware just like us. So obviously, as far as our outward activities are concerned, we act in this world as if there are a multiplicity of sentient beings, because that's how it appears to be. That it's a part of this dream that there are a multiplicity of sentient beings. But if we want to go deeper, we have to consider to whom do all these multitude of sentient beings, to whom do they all appear? They all appear to me. So all these people are objects seen by us. Even the person we seem to be is an object seen by us. That is what makes up the person that I seem to be. It's a body, a mind, all these things. These are all objects. So ego is not any, Though ego is aware of itself as I am this person, ego is not actually the person. Ego is that which is aware of this person as I. So we need to distinguish ourself as ego from the person we seem to be. If we distinguish that, then all people, whether the person we take ourselves to be or any other person, all are objects. We are the subject. So understanding this distinction is very important if we are to investigate ourselves, because what we are to investigate is not the person we seem to be. It's not the body or mind or thoughts or feelings or likes or dislikes. It's who am I? Who is this I who is aware of all these likes and dislikes, these desires and attachments, these hopes and fears, these perceptions, memories? To whom do all these appear? So that's why Bhagavan says all phenomena are unreal, because they all appear and disappear. In whose view do they appear and disappear? Only in the view of ego. And ego itself is unreal because it also appears or disappears. But ego is a compound awareness. That is, it's a conflation of the pure awareness I am with a set of adjuncts as I am this person, I am this body, this mind, this identity that we mistake ourselves to be. What we are investigating when we practice self-investigation is we are investigating the awareness that we actually are. That's why Bhagavan sometimes refers to this practice as jnana-vichara. In verse 19 of Upadeshundya that I referred to earlier, he ends by saying, Jnana Vicharam idundipara. This is Jnana Vichara. Jnana Vichara means awareness investigation. Likewise, in the second sentence of the last sentence of the first paragraph of Nana, he says, in the first sentence, he concludes by saying, it's necessary for oneself to know oneself. And then he says, for that, Nana innam jnana vicharame mukhya sadhanam. The awareness investigation, who am I, is the principal means. So what we are investigating is the awareness that is ourself as awareness. So in order to go deep, we need to understand everything else that appears, not only all the other people, but even the person we seem to be. All these are objects. We are the subject. This is what is called drisya viveka, distinguishing the seer from the seen, the knower from the known, the experiencer from the experienced. Having a clear, understanding this clearly is essential if we are to investigate ourselves, because otherwise we'll be investigating some object or phenomenon that we mistake ourselves to be. What we need to investigate is only this fundamental awareness of our own being, I am. So I hope this is a helpful answer for the friend who asked this.
The next question. I have seen a few videos on YouTube and I'm intrigued by the question continually asked, who am I? I'm a little lost that just reading about this or listening to it on video does not change my awareness. What does one need to do to inculcate this into daily life if there is no meditation or practice? Most gurus have received enlightenment as a gift, but what can we do to experience the same state, that is, the state of complete bliss, not owning a mind or a body? I can talk about it, read about it, even tell others about it, but unless I experience it, it is evasive.
Yeah. Yes. Well, practice is necessary. The practice that is necessary is the practice of self-investigation. That is fixing our attention on ourselves. Understanding these things is necessary, because if we don't understand, we won't know what it is we're to investigate. So just like I was answering to the previous question, it's very necessary for us to distinguish ourselves as awareness from all the things that we are aware of. In other words, we need to distinguish the knower from the known, the experiencer from what is experienced, the seer from the seen. So we are to investigate ourselves as that awareness that is aware of all these things. So it's only the awareness that we need to investigate. And in order to investigate awareness, we need to attend to it. But awareness is not an object. Usually when we talk about attention, we think of attending to things other than ourselves. But the same attention that we use to attend to other things, we need to turn back to face ourselves, to attend to ourself alone. Ourself means ourself as awareness. So that is the practice. And merely reading about these things, talking about them, thinking about them, even telling others about them, this is helpful for our understanding. But we need to apply that understanding in practice. And we apply that understanding in practice by turning our attention back to ourselves and trying to keep it fixed on ourselves alone as much as possible. This alone is going to bring about a change. Otherwise, merely reading about these things, talking about them, telling others or whatever, this is not going to give us this is not going to free us from this false identification, I am this body. So to separate ourselves from the body, from all the adjuncts that we mistake ourselves to be, the only way is to attend to ourselves. That is to attend to the awareness to which all these things appear. So practice is absolutely necessary. Bhagavan made that clear. Meditation is necessary, but what we need to meditate upon is not anything other than ourselves, but ourself alone. In other words, meditate on the awareness that we actually are. That is what Bhagavan calls Swarupa Dhyana. Meditation on what we actually are, which is just awareness.
I think these are now the last two questions.
Yeah.
And, okay. The first question is, when we die, we lose everything about our worldly persona, namely our memories, thoughts, ideologies, beliefs, etc. On the other hand, we know that the infinite consciousness, that is God, transforms into the material realm as a human body to gain experiences of all kinds on earth. The knowledge from those experiences should be maintained, kept in a journal or whatever. Upon the death of the human being, if God loses all, upon the death of the human being, if God loses all his experiences, all about his experiences when he was on earth, our life and efforts on earth become meaningless. God should remember and refer to his experiences when he was a human. He should say, I had such and such experiences when I was George, or whatever. Otherwise, there is no point in humanity. The worldly experiences of all humanity, as experienced by divine consciousness, must not be lost. There should be some sort of continuity, not a worldly one, of course, but there must be one. Our adventure of beingness should be infinite. I'm trying so hard spiritually to achieve some sort of enlightenment. I do not want to lose the fruits of my efforts to be lost upon my death. I want to accumulate them somewhere. Hence, there must be a continuity. Can you please comment on that issue? And the
Okay.
second question.
I'll answer this one and then we can deal with the second one. Firstly, God is the one infinite consciousness. God is immutable. He doesn't transform into anything. What is now aware of itself as I am a human being, I am a human body, that is ego. Ego is a compound awareness. It is a mixture of the pure awareness I am and a set of adjuncts, namely this upadi. Upadi means limiting adjuncts. So we experience ourselves as if we were a human body. So what is experiencing this is ourself as ego. Within ego, there is an element of reality. The element of reality in ego is the pure awareness I am. The adjuncts are unreal. So as a compound of what is real and unreal, ego is unreal. But the fact that ego as ego is unreal doesn't mean that there is not an element of reality in it. There is an element of reality in it. So in self-investigation, we are trying to investigate what is real in ourselves, namely the fundamental awareness I am. This fundamental awareness I am is what gives continuity. When we fall asleep at night, ego gets completely dissolved. There's no ego at all in sleep. How is it then that when ego rises again the next morning, there's that sense of continuity? But continuity is provided by this fundamental awareness I am. That is the one thing that shines throughout all the three states. In waking now, we're aware I am. In dream, we're aware I am. In sleep, we're aware I am. But whereas in waking and dream, we're aware of I am and many other things, including the mistaken awareness I am this body, in sleep, we're not aware of anything other than I am. So continuity is provided by this fundamental awareness I am. That is God. That is the infinite consciousness. That is immutable. Immutable means it never undergoes any change at all. So there is no transformation. Ego and everything known by ego is an illusory appearance. When we see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the rope has not been transformed into a rope. The rope has not been transformed into a snake. Though it seems to be a snake, it is always, even when it seems to be a snake, it's always a rope. According to certain interpretations of Vedanta, certain dualistic interpretations, there is a transformation. God transforms himself into all this. So we are all parts of God or whatever. That is not Advaita. That is not Bhagavan's teaching. But the teaching of Advaita is that there is always one only without a second. That one never becomes anything. It always remains as it is. So all this multiplicity is nothing but vivata. Vivata means it's an illusory appearance. So the doctrine of transformation is called Parinamavada. Right? God has become all this. That's the other interpretations of Vedanta, but are not strictly non-dualistic. According to Advaita, God is immutable. God never undergoes any change whatsoever. God is untouched by the appearance of all this. All this is just an appearance. God always remains as one only without a second. And that is what we actually are. So God does not need to gain experiences. He is infinite. So he's not lacking anything. He's perfect and infinite in his own being. In the Upanishad, God is that Brahman is defined as Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahman. So Brahman is Satyam, the what is real, the pure being. He's Jnana, pure awareness, and he is Ananta, infinite. Since he's infinite, he's not lacking anything. So God doesn't seek to gain experiences. All experiences are only for ego. And ego is a false awareness of ourself. Just like the snake is a false perception of the rope, the ego is a false awareness of ourself. So in order to annihilate ego and know ourselves as we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves. Regarding what happens at death, yes, that is the person we now take ourselves to be. Now I take myself to be Michael James. When death comes, Michael James is finished. There will be no Michael after that. So what? And the memories will be lost. Everything will be lost. Well, not everything, but all that I now take myself to be will be lost. What continues, if ego hasn't been annihilated at the time of death, ego will continue. Ego is the dreamer. So long as the dreamer remains, dreaming will continue. So this present life, my life as Michael, is a dream. When this dream comes to an end, Michael is finished. But what continues is the I that is now aware of itself as I am Michael. So what does this I take with it? The only thing it takes with it are its vasanas. Vasanas are what constitute what is called the causal body, karana sarira. This karana sarira has no existence independent of ego, but it is called the karana sarira because the vasanas are the seeds that give rise to everything else. So if we, in this lifetime, we are practicing any spiritual practice, the inclination to follow that type of spiritual practice, we will take with us. So if we are following Bhagavan's path, for example, in this lifetime, in the next lifetime, the inclination to follow this path, the liking to follow this path that we have developed will resume. So Krishna makes it very clear in the Gita, and Bhagavan also made it very clear. Whatever progress we make in the spiritual path, it is never lost. So if we follow the spiritual path in this lifetime, but don't attain our goal, the total annihilation of ego, in the next lifetime, we will be given such a our Praarabda will be so shaped, but we come across these teachings again and we again resume following this path. So nothing is lost in that sense. That is, whatever effort we make, and Bhagavan said, even the slightest effort we make in this path of self-investigation will never be lost. So every moment of self-attentiveness is one step closer to our goal. So though the body, though our present identity as I am this person, I am Michael, or I am whoever, this will be lost. There'll be no more Michael. It'll be just a memory at best. Even that memory will sooner or later fade. People will not even have heard of who was this person. How many people have been born and died in this world? And we know about a few people who have made some impact, but then nothing more than memories. The person comes to an end at death. But what doesn't come to an end is I that mistakes that person to be itself. That I continues, that is ego, and what it takes along with it are its vasanas. Vasanas are the seeds that give rise to likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. So we take all, so by practicing any spiritual path, we are developing certain vasanas. These vasanas will come with us. So no effort we make in this spiritual path is going to be in vain. Experiences will forget everything. Sometimes there are cases where people, particularly in childhood, have some memories of their previous lives, but usually those memories they lose as they grow up. But it's actually a blessing that we forget all our previous lives, because any experience of anything other than ourselves is not real. So why should we want to retain those experiences? If we forget everything, we're lucky. So long as that love to follow this path, that's all we need. And that will never be lost. That will come with us. So no amount of effort made in this spiritual path will ever go in vain. That continuity will be maintained by the vasanas that we've cultivated. And the one whose vasanas they are, that is ego, that will also continue until we know ourselves as we actually are. Then that will come to an end. And then the ultimate continuity is our own being, I am. That is eternal. That can never come to an end.
So the next question is, you are saying that our body is an image of our finite mind. Likewise, you say all we see are images of our mind. In other words, it is said that life is an illusion. But something important is missing in this doctrine. The existence of divine intelligence is not mentioned at all. There is an incredible intelligence that created our body, which is a miracle with its interacting organs and functioning. The position of planets in space that make life on Earth possible, the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the galaxies, etc., are all creations of this divine intelligence, and they're observable three-dimensional facts. How come we can still say the world and life are illusions, images, etc.? They are not pictures on two-dimensional screens. How come we can still think of the world and life as images? I have a serious difficulty in understanding this issue. Can you please clarify?
Okay, all the things that we see now and we talk about, the planets in space, all the different species of animals, different species of vegetables, all the galaxies, all these things, we experience all such things in dream. So long as we're dreaming, the dream world seems to be real. All the people we see, all the animals we see, all the places we see, the stars in the sky, the sun in the sky, the moon, the other planets, the oceans, the mountains, the cities, the people, everything seems to be real so long as we're dreaming. Have all these been created by a divine intelligence? No, they're all a mental fabrication. According to Advaita philosophy, as taught by Bhagavan, this waking state is just a dream. So all this is a mental fabrication. It has no existence independent of the mind. Yes, we can observe all these so-called three-dimensional facts, but that doesn't make them real. In fact, Shankar in some place, he says, the fact that something is seen or known itself means it's unreal. Because anything that is seen or known is seen or known by something other than itself. So all things that are seen or known appear in the view of ego. So they depend for their semi-existence upon the semi-existence of ourself as ego. If we investigate ego, we will find that what now seems to be ego is actually just the pure awareness that we actually are. So what actually exists is that not divine intelligence, but divine consciousness, divine awareness. That is the one awareness I am, the awareness of being. That is Satchit. That alone is real. Everything else is a mental fabrication. Bhagavan says in the fourth paragraph of Nana, he gives the analogy of a spider, but it spins out the thread from within itself and again absorbs it back into itself. We can see sometimes a spider will come down from the ceiling on a long thread, and then it'll go up again, taking the thread back into itself. Just like that, Bhagavan says, the mind projects the world from within itself and again absorbs it back into itself. So this world is totally mind dependent. It has no existence independent of the mind, the ego that perceives it. That is Bhagavan's teaching. That is the teaching of Advaita. we are free either to accept this or not to accept this. This doesn't appeal to many people. Many people don't want to accept, to consider the body and world and all these things to be unreal. They don't want to consider them mental fabrication. There are other teachings are given to suit those people. But if we ultimately, the ultimate truth is all these are just they're just a mental fabrication. And if we investigate this mind, this ego, we'll find the ego in whose view all these things exist itself is an illusion. What is real is what alone always exists, which is Satchit alone, the pure being awareness, which is infinite ananda, happiness, and infinite love. That is what is real. Everything else is a mental fabrication. We can accept it or not accept it. There's no compulsion in this part. If we don't like this philosophy, then there are so many other alternatives interpretations of Vedanta, which may be more to our liking. So Bhagavan never tries to compel anyone to accept what they're not willing to accept. When people came to Bhagavan who were not willing to accept this, Bhagavan would give them instructions that are suited to them at their level of spiritual development. That's why when Bhagavan was asked, what teachings can be given for the uplift of the masses, Bhagavan said, teaching cannot be given en masse. Teaching needs to be according to the taught. So what teachings are suitable for one person may not be suitable for another person. So when people came to Bhagavan, he would always, though his pure teachings are this deepest teaching, he wouldn't force this on people who were not willing to accept it. He would talk to them at their own level, accepting their own view of the world, and give them appropriate guidance so they can progress from where they are. That's why we sometimes see Bhagavan talking about other spiritual practices, because he knows not everyone is going to be drawn to this path of self-investigation. So for others, there are other practices which will purify the mind, and thereby eventually they'll be drawn to this path. But only when we are ready, by his grace, will we be attracted to this path.
Michael, there is a question on Guru Vācaka Kōvai, which was posted a little while ago
Okay.
by Swami Niritanand, and I think maybe we
Yeah.
can. It's sort of a question, or rather, it's asking for a comment. So the comment is, with reference to verse 970 of Guru Vācaka Kōvai, there are these three verses quoted by David Godman in his joint English translation of Guru Vācaka Kōvai with Robert Butler and Dr. Venkata Subramaniam from Sri Ramana Padmalai, where Bhagavan says, number one, why do you pointlessly find fault with me, saying that I no longer look at you? This is verse 35 of Padmalai. 2. If you would only fix your gaze upon me, you would know that, established in the heart, my gaze is ever fixed upon you. Verse 36. Number 3. I'm looking at you from within the self. I never leave you. How can this fact be known to your externalized vision? Verse 37. Please do read out these verses from Padmalai for the benefit of all those attending the satsang. It would be wonderful if Michael James could comment on these verses as well.
Yeah, in these verses, Bhagavan is essentially saying the same thing. Why do you pointlessly find fault with me, saying that I no longer look at you? Well, when we talk about look at, this is a metaphorical way of saying it. That is, Bhagavan never sees us as other than himself, but he is always shining in our heart as our own being. So he is always knowing us, each and every one of us, as himself, not as something other than himself. So we are all within the orbit of his look of grace. And as he says in the 12th paragraph of Nana, just like the prey that has been caught in the jaws of a tiger will never escape, those who have been caught in the glance of Guru's grace will certainly be saved and never forsaken. Who are those who have been caught in the glance of his grace? We can interpret it at a different level. Of course, when we are drawn to his path, that is a very special way of being caught in the glance of his grace. So the fact that we are attracted to his path, that means we've been caught. But ultimately, as he affirms in this verse, then there's no one who is not already caught in this. But because of the outward going mind, we're not aware of that. And then the next verse, if you would only fix your gaze upon me, you would know that, established in my heart, my gaze is ever fixed upon you. Yes, that's exactly what Bhagavan is saying. That is, he's ever there in our heart. He's ever knowing us as we actually are. In other words, he knows us as himself. But we don't know him as ourself because we are always looking outward. So if you want to know him as he knows himself, we have to look within and see that he's ever shining in our heart as our own self, as what we actually are. Then the third one, looking at you from within the self, I never leave you. How can this fact be known to your externalized vision? It would take me some time to find the original verse, because I'd have to look through some PDFs. But it's a little bit misleading, looking at you from within the self. There's no word in Tamil or in Sanskrit that means the self. That is, it's a lot of, it's a very imprecise translation. Bhagavan may say, looking, well, it's not that there's a self and Bhagavan is in that self. The self here refers to Swarupa, what we actually are. And he's not something within that, he is that. So I don't know exactly how Murugan has worded it in the verse, but what is within that, what is within Swarupa is Swarupa alone. So he is by being Swarupa, Swarupa is Satchit, pure being awareness. So just by being what he is always knowing us. That he's knowing us not as the person we take ourselves to be, but as we actually are. And by knowing us thus, that is the greatest grace. So I never leave you. How can he leave us? He's our very own being. So he can never leave us. Ineya viduva arunachala, Bhagavan says in Aksharamai. Now who can leave the others? We cannot leave him, he cannot leave us. So he never leaves us. He's ever shining within our heart as our own being, as our fundamental awareness, I am. How can this fact be known to your externalized vision? Yes, so long as we're looking outwards, we can understand these words, but we can never fully appreciate what Bhagavan means here. The only way to fully appreciate it is to turn within and see him as he sees himself, which is as ourself. So when we see him thus, we are no longer separate from him. So he alone can know himself. So if we want to know him, we have to be him, and we can be him only by knowing ourselves as we actually are, because he is what we actually are.
Dear Michael, thank you for your presence today. Can you please give some thoughts on why in waking dream we remember so many thoughts and memories, though in waking dream we remember very little?
I think that actually in dream we do remember. In dream we remember our present life. It's sometimes certain dreams, it depends. That is, there's a difference in qualities of dreams. Some dreams um, are more fleeting and insubstantial. Some dreams are more substantial. This is according, as Bhagavan clarified, this is according to the degree of identification with the body. And this is not only a difference between one dream and another, it's even a difference within the waking state. If we're very, very sleepy, if we're being overpowered by sleep and trying to keep awake for one reason or another, our state is a bit like a dream in which everything is very unstable. So the stability of dream depends upon the degree of attachment we have to the body at that particular moment. But in many dreams, well, firstly, one thing we remember our identity. If we experience ourselves as Michael or whoever in the waking state, we experience ourselves as the same person in dream. Of course, it's not the same body, because if the body in dream is injured, that injury doesn't affect the waking body, but the basic identification, I am such and such a person, we experience ourselves as the same person. And we have memories. In dream, if someone asks, what school did you go to? It may be that we may have gone to school more than 50 years ago, but in the dream we'll remember, oh, I went to such and such a school. I had such and such friends. My parents' name were so-and-so. So when we are dreaming, we seem to be awake. So that all the memories from our waking state continue in the dream state. If someone asks us about our childhood, we're not going to say, oh, I don't remember. No, we remember very clearly in the dream. If we try to remember our childhood, if we try to remember what town or village we were born in, where we grew up, all these things we remember in dream. Because so long as we're dreaming, it seems to be a continuity of this so-called waking state. Because the reason is the dreams we have at night are dreams within a dream. That is, the whole of our present life is one dream. And within this dream, we have sub-dreams, so to speak. That is, the dream of our present life is interrupted every day by periods of sleep. And the periods of sleep are interrupted by dreams, but those dreams are part of this whole total dream. So that's why we have the same identity in dream. When this body dies, and the next life, most of our memories, or our memories will fall, more or less be completely erased, and we'll have a completely different identity. That's a completely different dream. But the dreams we have in this lifetime are part of it's dreams within the whole dream of our present life. I hope that's a clear answer to that question.
The next question, would a lucid dream be a helpful analogy for explaining jnana? In an ordinary dream, the sleeper becomes fully identified with the dream body and takes the dream world to be real. In a lucid dream, however, the sleeper knows that the sleeping body and the dream are separate, experiencing the dream with awareness and a sense of distance. Is realization similar to this, except that the jnani is no longer identified with any body at all, but abides as the formless, unchanging absolute, while forms continue to appear?
In the first verse of Ekama Panchakam, Bhagavan says, Tanne Marandu, having forgotten oneself, Tanu Ve Tan Eni, thinking the body alone to be oneself. Enil Peravi Editu, taking innumerable births in this way. Iradi, in the end, Tanne Unandu, knowing oneself, Tane Adal, being oneself, Ulahu, Ulahat Sanchara Kanavin, viritale khan. It is just waking up from a dream of wandering all over the world. So each life, each life is a dream. But the totality of all these countless dreams is also just one long dream. Jnana is nothing but waking up from the dream in which all these dreams occur. So it's jnana cannot be likened to a dream of any kind whatsoever. It is the dissolution of the dreamer. So a so-called lucid dream is not at all an appropriate analogy for jnana. Secondly, this term lucid dream, it has become a very popular term, but it's a very, very vague, there's no precise definition of what is a lucid dream. Even if in dream we think we are dreaming, that's just an idea. We're still dreaming. A lucid dream is no less a dream than any other dream. In dreams, sometimes we can recognize we're dreaming, but we're dreaming. The dreams still seem very, very real. Even though sometimes we can notice, oh, this cannot be waking state because what I've just seen is not possible. For example, we may climb up a hill, and when we reach the top of the hill, the ocean is just in front of us, as if we're on a beach. Well, that's obviously impossible. But so sometimes we recognize from certain anomalies within the dream, but we are dreaming. But even though we know we're dreaming, it's still we're dreaming. The dream doesn't come to an end just because we recognize that we're dreaming. I mean, and sometimes if we are often dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings in the waking state, we will continue dwelling upon them in dream. So even when the dream seems perfectly normal, and even when there's not any anomaly that shows, oh, this is impossible in waking state, so this must be a dream. Even we sometimes a thought occurs to us in dream, oh, this is just a dream. But though we recognize it to be a dream, or we think we recognize it to be a dream, it's still a dream. We are dreaming, but we are dreaming, but we are dreaming. That is, we dream, but we are recognizing that our dream is a dream, but it's still a dream. So there's no real significance in these so-called. We have all sorts of experiences in dream. Some dreams we may call lucid, some dreams we may say are less lucid, but there's no significance in them at all, because any dream is an experience of things other than ourselves. Experiencing things other than ourselves is unreal. And who is experiencing all these things? Whether the dream is lucid or unlucid, it's the same I experiencing it. So what we need to know is the reality of this I that is experiencing all these things. This present state is a dream. Is this a lucid dream or an unlucid dream? I mean, it really doesn't. It's a very superficial idea. This idea of a lucid dream. We experience all types of things in dream. Why should we say some dreams are lucid, others aren't lucid? There's no clear definition of what it means. But whatever dream it is, it's all a mental fabrication. This dream or that dream, all mental fabrication. So why to label some dreams as lucid and other dreams as non-lucid? It's not a substantive difference. It's all dream.
There are two short questions. The first is, what happens to your perception of the world when I am I is realized?
I am I is the awareness of ourself as ourself alone. When we're aware of ourself as ourself alone, there is no mind or body or world or anything. There is just pure being. As Bhagavan makes clear in verse 4 of Uludunapadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? What does that imply? If oneself is a form means if we rise as ego and thereby identify the form of a body as ourself, we therefore experience the world as a multitude of forms, and whatever conception we have of God is also a form. Even if we say, oh, I don't believe in God with form, I believe God is formless, that is just an idea in our mind. An idea is a mental form. So we cannot know God as formless so long as we know ourselves as a form. In order to know God as formless, as Bhagavan makes clear in Aruණacashtakam, in order to know God as formless, we need to know ourselves as formless. In other words, we need to know ourselves as we actually are. And then in the second sentence, he says, if oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? What he implies there is, we cannot see forms unless we take ourselves to be a form. So the forms, all forms are unreal. If we take ourselves to be a form, we are just one form among a multitude of forms. Other forms we call the world, and some other idea we have about God that we call God. But when we know when we remain as the formless being that we actually are, there's nothing other than ourselves. We can see this very clearly in sleep. In sleep, we don't identify ourselves with a form, and so we're not aware of anything other than ourselves. It's only when we are aware of ourselves as a form that the appearance of other forms comes into being. So when we know ourselves as we actually are, there are no forms whatsoever. There is one only without a second. No division, no. As Bhagavan says in verse 28 of Upadesha Undiyar, when one knows what the real nature of oneself is, then Anadi, Ananta, Akhanda, Satchidananda. Anadi means beginningless. Ananta means endless or infinite. Akhanda means unbroken, Satchidananda. Being, awareness, bliss. That is what we actually are, and that alone is what will remain when we know ourselves as we actually are. In the third and fourth paragraphs of Nana, Bhagavan makes it very, very clear. So long as we are aware, so long as there's perception of the world, there is not Swarupa Darshana. We do not know ourselves as we actually are so long as we know the world. Because we know the world, we experience the appearance of a world only when we mistake ourselves to be a body. So long as we mistake ourselves to be a body, we don't know ourselves as we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we know clearly we alone are. Nothing else exists or even seems to exist. That is why the ultimate state is called ajata. Ajata it means literally it means not born. That is, it's the state in which nothing has ever come into being, or even seemed to come into being, because everything that comes into being or seems to come into being seems to come into being in whose view? Only in the view of ego. And ego is a false awareness of ourselves. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we know we have always been pure awareness and never anything other than pure awareness. So there never was any ego, therefore never was any body or mind or world or anything. And likewise, in the fourth paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan says, so long as the world appears, Swarupa does not appear. When Swarupa appears, the world does not appear. Swarupa means what we actually are. When he says appears, of course, it doesn't appear and disappear. But when we know ourselves as we actually are, there is no world. When we know the world, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. It's as simple as that. Bhagavan's philosophy is extremely simple. The difficulty arises when we're not willing to accept what Bhagavan says. Then we get into all sorts of complication. But if we're ready to accept what Bhagavan says at face value, it's extremely simple. The world appears and God appears to be something other than ourselves because we must have risen as ego and therefore mistaken ourselves to be a body. Get rid of ego, and what remains is what we actually are, which is one only without a second.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Right.
I think that's all the questions that I can see. So
Okay.
I think it's already very late. So I think
Right, right.
we need to call it today. So thank you so much for
Yes.
being so patiently answering all these questions. And
Right.
thank you, everyone, for being here and for your very, very interesting questions. Thank you. And we'll close with Bhagwan's mantra, and then we'll see you in, is it in 2 weeks?
2 weeks, yes,
In
yes.
2 weeks, yeah. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya.